Forget everything you know about gangsters from the movies. Tonight, we journey into the heart of darkness, to where the real legends were born. How did a handful of poor men from sun-scorched Sicilian villages with nothing but hunger in their eyes and a sharp knife in their belt manage to conquer New York City? We will reveal their secret code of honor, their bloody rituals, and show the path that turned simple peasants into the invisible kings of the greatest city in the world. This story will make your blood run cold. Imagine Sicily at the end of the 19th century. This isn't the paradise from a travel brochure. It's a harsh, scorched land where foreigners had ruled for centuries, and poverty was as common as the blazing sun. Here, law and justice were empty words. Power belonged to whoever was stronger and smarter. It was in this atmosphere of lawlessness that a phenomenon was born: the mafia. Initially, they weren't gangsters, but men of honor who offered protection where the government was powerless. They lived by their own laws, the most important of which was omerta, the code of silence. To break it was to sign your own death warrant. It was these men, hardened by poverty and cruelty, who began their great exodus to America. They arrived at Ellis Island with small bundles in their hands, knowing no English and having no money. They weren't met with streets paved with gold, but with the cold, overcrowded slums of Little Italy. The locals looked down on them, treating them as second-class citizens. The police didn't protect them, and the jobs were humiliating. In this hostile world, they could only rely on each other. The Sicilians formed groups, creating little islands of their old homeland in the heart of a foreign city. They were a family, and like any family, they protected their own. This is how the Black Hand, La Mano Nera, was born on the streets of New York. It wasn't the mafia yet, but its wild, untamed ancestor. Gangs extorted money from fellow Italian immigrants, owners of small shops and businesses. A letter with a black handprint would be slipped under the door, demanding money for protection. Refusal meant a burned down business or broken bones. It was brutal, primitive racketeering, but it gave them their first taste of power, and more importantly, easy money. They learned the fundamental law of the streets. Fear is a currency more valuable than the dollar. And then came 1920. The US government gave the mob the greatest gift in history. It passed prohibition. Alcohol was outlawed, but millions of Americans had no intention of giving up drinking. They wanted to drink, and they were willing to pay for it. For the Sicilian gangs, this was a sign from heaven. They instantly switched from petty extortion to bootlegging, speakeasies, smuggling from Canada, secret distilleries. Money began to flow like a river. Yesterday's street toughs were transformed overnight into rich men in expensive suits and shiny cars. But big money always brings big blood. New York was divided between two old bosses, two mustache Petes as they were called, Joe the Boss Masseria and Salvatore Maranzano. They were old-school Sicilians who despised anything non-Sicilian. A war erupted between them, known to history as the Castellamarese War.
The city streets became a battlefield. Gangsters gunned each other down in broad daylight. Blood flowed freely. The war was draining both sides, but neither would back down. However, in the shadow of these two giants, a new generation was rising. Young, ambitious, and far more clever gangsters. Among them was one whose name would become a legend, Charles "Lucky" Luciano. He wasn't like the old bosses. He grew up on the streets of New York, not Sicily. He thought like a businessman, not a village thug. He understood that infighting was bad for business. He even worked with gangsters of other nationalities, Jews, Irish. For the old guard, this was unthinkable. Luciano envisioned a future where organized crime operated like a smooth, efficient corporation. But to build that future, he had to get rid of the old men. Luciano devised a brilliant and devilishly clever plan. First, he pledged his loyalty to Joe Masseria. Then, on April 15, 1931, he lured his boss to lunch at a restaurant on Coney Island. During the meal, Luciano excused himself to go to the restroom, and assassins burst into the room, riddling Masseria with bullets. Having betrayed his boss, Luciano switched sides to his enemy, Maranzano, who was thrilled. The war was over. Maranzano declared himself the boss of all bosses and called a grand meeting of all gangsters. He was on top of the world. But his triumph would be short-lived. Luciano knew that Maranzano was just another tyrant like Masseria. Just 5 months after Masseria's murder, Luciano's men, disguised as tax agents, walked into Maranzano's office and stabbed him to death. In a single year, Luciano had eliminated the two main figures of the old world. The path was clear, but he didn't repeat Maranzano's mistake. He didn't call himself the boss of all bosses. Instead, he started a revolution in the underground world. He gathered the leaders of the most powerful families and proposed an idea that changed everything. He created the Commission. It was a board of directors for the mafia. Now all disputes were settled not with guns on the street, but at a meeting table. The Commission divided territories, approved new rules, and maintained order. In New York, the 5 families were formed. These were the cores of the Commission: the Luciano, later Genovese; Mangano, later Gambino; Gagliano, later Lucchese; Bonanno and Profaci families. The American Mafia, or Cosa Nostra, was born. This was no longer a gang. It was a true underground empire. Its structure was as clear as a Roman legion's. At the top was the Don, the boss of the family. He was assisted by a consigliere, a wise advisor. Below them were capo regimes, or captains, each commanding his own crew of soldiers. And the soldiers were the ones who did all the dirty work on the streets. But to become even a simple soldier, a made man, was incredibly difficult. You had to prove your loyalty and pass a sacred ritual. The initiation ceremony was shrouded in secrecy. The recruit was brought into a dark room with the boss and a capo. He would take an oath of loyalty. His finger was pricked, and a drop of his blood was smeared on a card with the image of a saint. The card was set on fire and placed in the recruit's hand. As it burned, he had to say, "May my soul burn in hell like this saint if I betray the oath." From that moment, he was part of the family. The family was more important than his wife, his children, even God. And the main law of his family was omertà, the code of silence. To talk to the police was the ultimate sin, punishable only by death. Their business expanded to an incredible scale. They controlled labor unions, construction, the docks, waste management, gambling, and loan sharking. They infiltrated every sphere of New York life. They were the invisible power, a shadow government. And at the head of this empire were men whose names were spoken in whispers, men like Carlo Gambino. He didn't look like a movie gangster. Quiet, modest, he seemed more like a simple shopkeeper. But behind this facade was a brilliant and ruthless strategist who ran the most powerful family in America for 20 years. And he died in his own bed, an incredible rarity for a mafia boss. They made the journey from penniless immigrants to the kings of New York. They built their American dream on blood, fear, and an unbreakable code of honor. They created an organization that became a legend, a symbol of the dark side of human ambition. They proved that even if you come from a small village with nothing, you can become the master of the world. All you need is a will of steel, loyal men by your side, and to never, ever break your silence.
Their story is a hymn to the power of the human spirit, even when it's directed down the darkest of paths. From the dusty roads of Sicily to the neon lights of Manhattan, they built an empire on fear, loyalty, and blood. Their story is more than just a crime chronicle. It's a brutal saga of power, ambition, and what a man will do to escape poverty. But every empire must eventually fall. Do you want to know how the FBI hunted these phantoms for decades? And who the man was who dared to break Omerta and bring them all down? If this video gets 1,000 likes, we'll release part 2. The War on the Mob, the man who broke Cosa Nostra. Subscribe so you don't miss it.